Good afternoon, Devox. I'm very excited to be with you this afternoon to share about how we can scale engineering team across continents. My name is Ludovic. I'm working as a CTO at NFQ. We are a consulting firm specialized in software development, data platform, and cybersecurity. We operate in different countries, and actually, I'm coming from far because I'm living in Vietnam for the last 4 years. I'm originally from France, as you may have spotted with my accent. At least the question is solved for now. And over the last 4 years, basically, I've been working extensively to build teams across different countries: Germany, Vietnam, Thailand, and Egypt. And today, I would like to share with you 2 key learnings I made along my journey. The first learning I made, and I would like to share today, is actually what is happening when suddenly your team is spanning across 3 different time zones. What are the consequences? What are the impacts? What do you need to consider if you are going on that way? The second aspect I would like to share with you today is how can we build collaborative culture across borders? And it's much more challenging than we think, actually. Even if we are engineers, if we are working in products, if we speak somehow the same domain language, borders create boundaries. And we're going to try to address those today. When a company starts to think globally, they want to expand overseas, they want to expand the team, usually they come up with a couple of challenges, right? They ask questions. They say, what about the skills? Is it going to be hard, difficult to actually hire good people overseas? Do we have the same expectation in terms of skills? In my opinion, this is not really a problem today. You have absolutely brilliant engineers everywhere on Earth, in every country, right? I've been working for the last couple of years in Southeast Asia, and you have a lot of very, very good engineers because you have a lot of good university. So we need to upgrade a little bit our expectations because it's not really a problem. The second problem that people may raise as well is, what about the language? Especially if you are a non-English speaker, right? If you're living in France, in Germany, in Spain, suddenly you have to switch the language of the organization. It can be challenging. The challenge as well could be to hire, again, overseas people that can speak good English. But in my opinion, again, it's not really a problem. If you decide to make this move anywhere, you will find the people that are able to bridge that. And the third concern could be about time zone. This is a topic that I hear a lot. How are we going to manage the time zone differences? We have different time zones to manage. This is going to be a problem. In my opinion, again, after experiencing it for many years, it's not really a problem when you think about it. As an engineer, we like actually to be focused. We hate being constantly interrupted with meetings, Slack messages, emails. And when you minimize the overlapping time, basically, you allow your team to focus. They can actually produce, whether it's features, documentations, codes. And for the rest of the day, they can actually contribute to synchronization and meetings, right? So I see the time zone differences today more as an advantage than a limitation. And you have actually similar things happening in some company when they decide one day to have no meetings. This is exactly what they are trying to do. They are trying to create some space for people to focus. So if the skills, the languages, and the time zone are not really a problem, what is challenging when we scale globally? And why scaling teams is really hard? When I usually operate in teams that are dysfunctioning, I like to spend time with the team leads, right? And I like to sit one-on-ones and to ask a couple of questions. Why do you think we have this problem today? Why do you think we have conflicts between teams? And usually one of the elements that is recurring for different teams is there is a lack of transparency, right? We don't know what the other team is doing. Are they really working? They deploy something that impacts, but they never share with us these changes. And usually it creates a lot of frustration. It creates a lot of conflict between teams, and this is what they call transparency, lack of transparency. The reason is very simple. When you scale, it's about the organization. It's about how do you shape, basically, relations between teams, how you shape the vision. And when there is a dysfunctional team, it might be the sign that maybe the leadership team is not strong enough to enforce the vision and the direction, right? Here, the role of the leadership team when you go global is to provide clarity. What are we trying to achieve? Why do we want to go overseas? Nobody is going to lose their job. It's okay, guys. This is why we want to do that. And it's quite important that the leadership team communicates early about the directions, because people will be insecure. People will have ambiguities. People will assume. People will gossip. It's quite important from the beginning, when you start to go overseas, to say, look, this is the strategy we have in mind. This is what we are trying to do. And this is how we want to roll out things. Many, many times, we have teams that are not preparing enough, conducting this important change, which create insecurities within the teams. And of course, it's not helping the collaboration. The second aspect as well is to define clear responsibility in domains. We have the feeling that, yeah, we are just gonna give a little bit of work to this new team that is joining. But we usually lack to define responsibility in domains, allowing the team to be autonomous. I have seen some crazy organization. Some teams that were putting the back end in one country and the front end in another country. It's a disaster, right? Isolating as well by functions. We are gonna produce the code in one country, but another country is gonna review the code, test it. Doesn't make any sense as well. So it's quite important to define basically a space, ownership between teams and put everybody on the same level. The third aspect as well is to constantly share the milestones and the OKRs, right? You have a lot of teams that will believe that they are more important than others. And it's quite important to constantly reinforce where are we going, what is the goal, and what is the contribution of everyone toward this goal. If you don't do that, you create a risk that people don't feel comfortable in this complex organization. The second aspect is that once you have done that, you need to continuously align the team together, right? I have spent a lot of time with different team leads because we had so many issues, right? You have people that are just frustrated, and they will just escalate immediately this frustration, right? I used to work with a couple of team leads that whenever a developer complained about the work of somebody from a different team, they were just escalating, right? Writing a Slack message in front of everyone, sending an email with everybody in CCs. They were not trying to absorb the frustration and trying to handle it locally. And for me, it's a mistake from a leadership perspective. We need to be able to sit as a team lead and to say, okay, look, what you describe actually is not really a problem. So it doesn't matter. We are all working on the same team. And it's important that locally we are able to manage that. The same is happening top down, right? If you see team leads fighting publicly against each other, it doesn't give a great example for the teams. So it's quite important as well that the leadership team is constantly aligned, speak the same voice. If the leaders don't fight, the team will stop fighting against each other. So escalation needs to be managed as well, up and down, like I described. Avoid to be frustrated for every single thing that is happening and try to embrace a little bit of empathy. And finally, training via retrospective and follow-up. This is something that is quite important. People underestimate the complexity to work with different cultures, different teams, and distributed setups. It has to be constantly revisited. Okay? I was mentioning earlier about how we can organize autonomous team. How do we do that, actually? And there is a very good framework for that, a very good book that I really enjoy called Team Topologies. Basically, the structure of the teams is defined in 4 kind of like team setup, right? Usually, the default level is the stream-aligned team. You want a team that is organized end-to-end to have autonomy on one of your value stream. It can be one of your clients. It can be one of your core business functions. But you want to make sure that the team is able to make autonomous decisions. They are able to talk to clients. They are able to design. They are able to code. And they are able to deploy autonomously to production. You want to remove any validation steps that could break the flow. And you want to do that for every value streams by putting a team that is able to move fast by reducing the friction and the dependency. A second kind of team, of course, is the platform team. Usually when you provide services for the rest of the team. It's very common when you want to have cloud infrastructure services, CI/CD pipelines, monitoring. Every time you have something that can benefit to the rest of the organization, it has to be a platform team, a DevOps methodology that provides that. The third kind of team is enabling team. Specialists, security, architecture, design. You want to have specialists that can, for 1 or 2 sprints, support one team, but they provide an expertise very specific toward what the team is going to try to achieve in the next iteration. Finally, in some cases, you have also some subcomponents that nobody knows about. It's a strange language, strange framework. It's completely outdated. Again, you don't want to have so many people working on the same subcomponent. You will isolate that in that team. Okay, so this is the typology that is offered by these team topology approaches, which I find really good. This is actually what we did, right? Basically, we had a couple of teams, and everyone was structured across an alliance stream. They were able to talk to clients, one department within the organization. They were the clients. They were running interviews to understand what was the problem to solve. They were able to deploy autonomously to production feature. They were autonomous. The infrastructure team, of course, who was providing basically the CI/CDs, the monitoring tool, and so on. And we used the mobile app. We had a team of mobile developers. It didn't make any sense to spread them across value stream because the mobile app was something a little bit specific, edge cases. So this is why we put that. And by doing so, suddenly you create clarity. You create transparency. People don't overlap each other. You address the ambiguities and you address the insecurities. When we do that, it's quite important to create small teams across a product manager. Again, what we want is to allow teams to have a customer outcome. They need to feel proud. They need to feel their impacts. If you create validation steps by another team, by another process, you lose this aspect. What you want as well is to reduce absolutely the dependency between teams. So again, isolated domain, nobody is overlapping each other, and a lot of automation to avoid to depend to someone else. If I want to have access to something, I should not be able to be blocked by anyone. And finally, it's quite important still to foster cross-functional initiatives to have some coherence, right? This is where you can introduce, for example, chapters. This is where, for example, we used to introduce improvement sprints when we pick people from different teams, and for one iteration, together, they will improve collectively one cross-cutting concern across the system. So it doesn't mean because you have a value stream aligned team that you cannot break that from time to time, allowing cross-functional collaboration across teams so people still preserve the system. Because one consequence is when people are focused on their value stream, they tend to forget the overall system quality, and you start maybe to have a little bit of lack of coherence, technical depth that is increasing because people have a narrow-minded view on their part. Okay? So a couple of recommendations. When you start basically to work on that, on these teams, I highly recommend to use Team Canvas. Quite important to onboard the team. What are the goals, identity, how do we onboard our people? Second recommendation, have sprint reviews globally. One of the problems when you have a lack of transparency is because you don't know what other people are doing. And you assume by default that they are doing nothing. They are not contributing as much as you are doing. They are not working as hard as we are doing. They are not doing as great things as we are doing. To remove that, sprint review every 2 weeks. Every team is demoing to the rest of the organization what they have achieved. It's an easy way to kill basically these wrong feelings about transparency. And finally, like I mentioned, regular synchronization to break basically the silos that we are kind of creating. So it can be weekly between product managers, so they can align on the roadmap, and it can be as well monthly between chapters, backend, front-end, DevOps chapters, collaborating together across the teams. Okay? So now that we have solved that, coming back to my discussion with our team leads, usually they come to me and say, okay, the second reason why it's not working, why we have issue with the second team is that we have communication issues. And I use this quote because for me it makes no sense, right? I mean, everybody's speaking good English. I have one-on-ones with everybody. So what do you mean by communication issues? What is happening? It's because the second key important thing is that when you scale, you have to think about the people. And especially the fact that people are coming from different cultures, different backgrounds, different histories. And they have a very different way to perceive situation, to talk, to think, to lead, to react. A very good framework as well for that is called the Culture Map. It's a fantastic book written by Erin Meyer. She worked a couple of years to analyze the differences between the cultures. And she came up with criteria to evaluate the way people are thinking, leading, acting, reacting. And she defined basically a criteria of 8 attributes, basically, when she managed to position the cultures based on statistics. Okay, so like every framework, it's not perfect, but it gives a good understanding about, okay, I understand why this is happening. I will give you a couple of examples for you to understand. 4 years ago, when I relocated from France to Vietnam, I had a manager, right? And this manager invited me to meetings. And this meeting was with different engineers, team leads, and it was just the most frustrating meeting I have ever had in my life. The reason was very simple. There was no agenda, no purpose. People were just talking about solutions. But I was just like, okay, guys, please, can we slow down 2 minutes? What is the purpose of this meeting? What are we trying to achieve? Is it really a problem we are trying to achieve? But people had the tendency to focus on little deals, right? For them, the problem was easy and obvious, straightforward. We should not talk about it. We should rush into the solutions. And it was so frustrating for me because I like, to have details, context before making actions. I need to understand if this is a problem. What is the problem? How do we measure the problem? And then after, maybe, we can define what are the potential solutions we want to implement. The reason why it's happening is because depending on the culture, you have either a low context culture or a high context culture. Like I mentioned, this culture map visualization position countries around this scale. Low context culture and high context culture. In low context culture, you don't depend on the context, you need data, facts, information. You need to understand why before we can discuss. You need to have the context. You need to have details. You cannot start a conversation if you don't understand why we are doing that, what we are trying to achieve. On the opposite side, in the high context culture, you don't need that many details. You don't really care about the details. It's not so important because we will figure out along the way. Because the context will be kind of discuss informally later, because people are able to feel in the room and to read between the lines, right? So low context means I need clear instruction, clear data, clear problems. High context means we read between the lines, okay? So the reason why I was frustrating is because I was with a lot of people that were operating a different mode than me, and it took me a lot of time to adapt and also to share my expectations. And today, when we start a meeting, I always ask the same questions, guys. What is the purpose of this meeting? What do we need to leave? When we leave the meeting, what should we decide of? And what is the problem we're trying to solve? Keep asking this question for many years, and now it becomes a trend and people are applying it. So it's okay. Second frustration situation, I had a first one-on-one with my manager at the time. And we sit for 30 minutes. And the discussion was stellar, right? I mean, for 20 minutes, he tried to give me feedback, to say, okay, look, it could be great if you could do that, but it's a recommendation. This is not really what I meant. And by the way, you're doing a great job, but maybe you should try that. But it's not. And I was like, okay. Can you please tell me what do you expect? What is your directions? What is your feedback? Because I don't get it. And he was saying, no, but it's not really that. I mean, he was basically circling around for 30 minutes. And I left the meeting and I didn't understood what was the expectation. I was like, okay, I was so confused, right? So I took a time to reflect. And again, in this situation, it's because some culture are used to give very direct feedback, while some others, they are feeling uncomfortable about that. You have some culture, they are not afraid to be direct, to say, look, this is not working, it's not a good job, this is my expectations, clear instruction, clear feedback. In some other culture, they will circling around the topic without being too direct. And it will be, you will have to basically catch some keywords, interpret, read between the lines, feel the atmosphere in the room. This is something really, really hard to explain, but it's really the reality, it's really happening. I was in Japan 2 weeks ago, actually, because we have also a couple of clients in Japan. And in Japan, it's exactly about that. People are always super polite, very, very direct. I mean, very indirect, very like protocol, very like respectful. But then it's really hard to understand what is the expectations, and you have to constantly revisit gently. Okay, what is the problem? Because the limitation when people are not so direct is that you are not really sure if there is a problem. You're not really sure. Okay. Something is blocking, but why? I mean, can you explain me? And it's really complicated to unlock problems if people are not direct. So it's important to understand that and to feel the atmosphere in the room to be able to identify that there is a blocker and to remove it. Okay? So yeah, we have two different kind of like approach for delivering feedback. I had a third situation. And I was also very confused because, you know, like, in my perspective, I like working with colleagues. I really enjoy it, but work is work, friends are friends, right? And I don't really mix the two together, right? I mean, I am happy to have a beer after the work. I'm happy to participate to some social events, but I don't need to be connected at work, right? I'm here to do my job, to deliver value, to solve problems. And one day we had a discussion because I was saying, okay, this company is like a family. It's crazy. I mean, and somebody very direct say, okay, you don't understand. You don't understand what it means, right? And I was like, okay, but why? I mean, like, and you also have a way for culture to approach relationship by two directions. You have, for example, in Europe and the US, you are really like performance driven. You respect your colleagues, you enjoy working with them because they deliver. They are reliable. You can count on them. They are professionals, and then you feel connected, you respect them. So the outcome determines the quality of the relationship you have with them, right? On the other side, you have cultures where the relationship, the personal bondings matter more than the outcome. You have some culture that, okay, we spend time together, we are close, I understand who you are, I understand your family, and then I respect you, I connect with you. And it was really hard for me to grasp at the beginning that, okay, people expect me, in addition to the job, to create personal bonding, that I can share personal details, that they can go outside of work with me, and they were not really interested only by the quality of my work. And it took me a time to realize that. So again, culture, performance-driven, relationship-driven. Okay? I had also this comment later on that, okay, you are way, way, way too direct. You are speaking very, like, it's very rude, it's very disrespectful sometimes when you speak, and I didn't have that feeling, you know, because when I see a problem, I just describe it. We have a problem, it's not an issue, right? Or to challenge as well, to discuss, to understand, to ask questions. Again, in this methodology, you have cultures that are very confrontational. They accept basically being challenged, to discuss about problems, to challenge basically the status quo. It's the expectations, right? Especially in France, right? We like to complain about things. We like to discuss about things. We like to find basically problems or limitations, and we try, you know, to find a way, but we rarely accept things per default. While in some other culture, we prefer to avoid confrontations. We prefer to preserve harmony. And then we try to avoid to ask too much questions. We try to avoid to make people uncomfortable by asking questions publicly, by challenging their decisions. There is a huge sense of hierarchy as well in in Eastern culture. Okay? So quite interesting as well. What I'm saying that is because basically multicultural team is clearly not for everyone. You need to have an extra awareness layer that helps you to navigate that, because otherwise you will be, like me, completely frustrated for the first years. You will not understand things, you will not understand the expectations, and it's really, really crazy. So it's important to be really open-minded and to have empathy. You need to understand that there is different perspective, different backgrounds. The framework I just shared is not an assessment. It's not one is good and one is not good. It's just a fact about how culture evolve in the world and how you can understand these gaps to be able to be better, right? So you have to be super patient. You have to embrace the differences. Communication with good English as well. It's important to have a good English, curiosity, to have discussions with people, and as well to have still a solid technical background to be able to have autonomous teams, right? So if tomorrow you want to build a multicultural team, you have to select your people. They have to be open-minded, they need to have good English, and they need to have solid technical skills, because otherwise they will not have the foundation to be able to learn the remaining part about the culture. They will be constantly blocked. Okay? So be selective on the people you are hiring when they join this multicultural team, otherwise it will fail. Okay? It's not because you have very good engineers that it will work. You need to have people that are much more empathic, much more patient, much more open-minded when they join this kind of setup. You need to invest in cultural awareness. We introduce, for example, dedicated onboarding when we explain the cultural differences, without entering in stereotype, but just to understand why we have things that are happening in some way in some countries. And you have to accept that it will not work from day one. It's a process. Every time we establish teams from different countries, the first quarter is super challenging, super complex. The teams are not very productive. There is a lot of conflicts, insecurities. So you have to accept it's part of the process. It's part of the process. It cannot work from day one. Okay? Coming back to my discussion with my team leads, the third issue that I see when there is a dysfunctional team is like, yeah, these guys, they don't respect us. They do things without consulting us. They despise on us, right? And it's happening as well because when you scale teams, you need to think about the team culture. It has to be defined, structured, organized. One key problem that I foresee a lot is the us versus them pattern, right? It's always like, we are doing that, they are doing that. This is our job, they are not helping us. And this us versus them is incredibly uncollaborative approach. It's really toxic in many teams, and it's important to fight that, especially if you are in a leadership position, because it's not helping, and it's a huge blocker for team to collaborate. So what I did, basically, is to introduce inclusiveness in the language. Okay? I force everybody to say we instead of they. We have a problem. We are going to do that. We are going to own that. It's not us, they, it's we as a team, right? The second thing is to practice as well inclusiveness by saying our. This is our colleagues from this country. This is our product team. So you need to create a sense of ownership, of belongings, because otherwise, by tolerating just this language thing, people are thinking differently and are creating boundaries, right? And third, I avoid to use locations. So we define team names, but we stop using location because, again, it creates boundaries. When we say the German teams, Vietnamese team, the Thailand teams, the Egypt team, doesn't help. So we create names and we avoid to refer the teams by the location. We want to refer them by the outcome they have in the team, by the value they provide to the organization. The second aspect is to frame failures collectively. So many times we say, okay, these guys, they break the build. These guys, they introduce a bug. Oh, they made a mistake. But at the end, I don't care. We collectively have a problem. We collectively made a mistakes. So it's quite important to, again, reinforce this collective ownership to say, no, I mean, if this team is failing, everybody is failing. So it's quite important to encourage a sense, again, of collective ownership and to encourage transparency. In some culture, it's very hard to say we made a mistakes. It's really hard. So you have to show the example. You have to say, look, we did that, didn't work, we made a mistake. And step by step, you will observe in teams a change in the behavior. Suddenly people will raise and say, this is my responsibility. This is a mistake I made. This is what I learned from it. And it's really good. So you have to encourage that to create again this feeling of unity and belonging. And the third thing that we did as well was to embrace cultural diversity, right? I remember from one colleague who used to greet everybody in their language. So every time he was joining a meeting, he was saying hello in different languages, or he was saying hello to different locations. And I think it's really great. What we did as well was to openly share about traditions, specificities, cultural definition, right? Because you want to bring this cultural awareness. You want people to understand that they are living in different time zones, different culture, and it's not only about work. So usually we celebrate as well the birthday and also the national holidays when people can explain why this is happening with a little bit of history and context. And usually people really appreciate it because it's really cool. The second aspect is to promote non-violent communication. When you want to build a collaborative team culture, it's important to consider these facts. I used to hear so many violent communications, right? They always block progress. It's impossible to move forward with them. They never listen to us. It's very, very rude, right? They are not open-minded. When you use this kind of like communication, it's incredibly reducing, right? You are really like putting people in boxes. It's really not helping. So what we did was to introduce basically non-violent communication. Again, it's a great book. It's not new, okay? It's a book that has been there for like 30 years. And it's defined basically the way we are communicating by expressing basically emotions, impacts, feelings, to basically put some distance between what we say and what we want to say. So basically it works the following way. Instead of assessing people, judging people, putting evaluation, we observe. Instead of sharing thoughts, we share the impact on our emotion. Instead of having strategy, we explain why we need that. And finally, we make some requests. Okay, so I give you an example. Instead of saying, oh, you're always late on meetings, this is disrespectful for the team, we say, look, when you arrive late to a meeting, it creates distraction for the team. So I would like you to be on time for the upfollowing meetings. Is that okay for you? I am not judging, I'm just explaining an observation, an impact, a feeling, and I formulate a request. And then it's really not offensive. Okay? So basically, this is what we did, right? Instead of saying they always block progress, people need just to explain, look, I feel frustrated because I like progress, and I notice that we have some challenges. How can we make it better, right? It takes time for people to learn this framework, to reformulate, but it's very powerful, it's very helpful, because it helps basically to de-escalate some situation. It's even more important when most of the communication is happening by writings. Usually we are a little bit more nasty when we write things, right? We are more direct, we are more sharp, we are more like less patient maybe. So this is quite important as well to formulate things correctly so people don't feel frustrated or attacked. Okay? A couple of things we did as well to promote this basically collaborative team culture. What we did was basically, like I mentioned, establish some high communication standard, right? Inclusiveness, we, instead of us versus them. This non-violent communication that I just explained. But we did also something interesting. At some point, people refuse to talk to each other and to collaborate, right? They say, but what is the point? We're not working together. I don't need to create connections. What we did between the team leads was to run a Tinder-like challenge. We pick people from different teams, and we organize for them a meeting. And they were forced basically to prepare this meeting with a couple of questions, and to write at the end a small report to say, okay, what discussion did you have with the people from the other team? We did that for a quarter, basically. And we had actually very good outcomes. People say, were really engaged at the end. At the beginning, they were very reluctant, but at the end of the discussion, I was saying, wow, I learned so many things. Oh, this guy is so interesting. Oh, this is awesome. So at some point, you need also maybe as a leader to force the connection between people if they are reluctant. One way is this Tinder-like approach when you select people from different teams and they have basically to talk together. Okay. Sharing session as well help between the teams, and you need to rotate that between teams. It's quite important to create informal forum when people can share. And finally, again, cross-functional initiatives. We used to run a couple of hackathons every quarter. Basically, it was one day when people were not working actively on any productive features, but instead, on the morning, they were coming with ideas, and they had the rest of the day to implement it. And they were working with people from other teams. So they say, look, I observe this problem. I would like to implement that. This is my prototype. Who would like to join me? And it allows as well to foster cross-functional collaboration. And I reinforce what I mentioned before, task force for solving a specific problem. It's incredibly powerful when we spot a problem that impacts all the teams, to select people from different teams and to say, okay, for 1 or 2 iterations, you are going to work together to make an assessment about the problem, to suggest a solution, and later on we will implement it. So it's really important, again, to break silos from time to time by creating this cross-functional task force. Okay? So in summary, tomorrow, if you go back to your job, to your work, to your boss, and you start maybe to think about, okay, do I want to scale my team globally? Do I feel comfortable to work with like teams distributed overseas? I think there is 3 things you need to consider. First, I strongly believe that it provides a lot of diversity. 4 years working with different cultures, I can tell you that I see a lot of value by doing that. I have seen incredibly people. I have worked with amazing minds from different countries that came up with very original ideas to improve things, to come up with good solutions. And I think this is incredibly enrichment for their life to have the opportunity to work with diverse culture. This diversity, in my opinion, provides a strong competitive edge in terms of business. The distribution as well of the teams provides some flexibility. Time zone differences, like I mentioned, I see it as a very good and positive example. You allow team to focus, and from time to time, they can synchronize. You need to roll out something, a team can cover, basically follow the sun principle, and you can have a team that deploys something, and later on, someone will follow up. You can have people that can manage a production system on different time zones. It's very positive. This distribution, in my opinion, provides a lot of flexibility. But it comes, of course, with an overhead. You need to have a strong leadership team, some strong managers that are able to embrace this paradigm because there is an overhead. It's costly to adjust to different culture. It's costly to align constantly. It's costly to coach the people because working globally requires this extra step in terms of like emotional intelligence, sensitiveness, and connection that needs basically to be learned along the journey. Okay? So this is basically how I would summarize, if tomorrow you want to go global, what you should think about. I would like to summarize again these 3 excellent books, very easy to read, that structure a little bit basically how we have solved some of the problems. Not all of them, but most of them. I highly recommend, it's very easy to read. It's very good references, so it's really good. And thank you so much for your attention. And since we have a couple of minutes, I will be happy to take some questions. Thank you. Yes.
So can you, when you're scaling teams across the globe and you're working in different time zones, how do you deal with the work-life balance between different team members? So for example, if you have more senior colleagues on the team that have families that need to get home, and other teams are starting at that time, and usually the overlap is only a couple of hours. Are there any things that you could suggest
Okay, so I will repeat the questions. The question is, how do we preserve work-life balance when we have senior member spread across the globe, and sometimes they go home, but some other teams are kind of like starting working, and maybe they need help. And basically, what is my recommendation, or what did I observe? It was basically your questions. I think it's a really good questions. What we observe at the beginning is that people have a strong sense of ownership. And when help is needed, I have seen so many times exactly what you describe. People answering emails, Slack messages at 9, 10, 11 p.m. in the evening, right? I think this is quite important for people to realize that it's not because other people are working that you also have to work. So at some point, it's quite important to enforce basically the locality and to help people to realize that, yes, they are part of something else is happening, it's expected. And we don't want you basically to be involved. So you have some people that have a strong professional ethics. It's really struggling for them. They feel highly responsible, especially when something is happening that is blocking everybody. And my only recommendation today is basically just to enforce basically the right to be disconnected, to have some Slack status to say, look, this is the time differences, to have double clocks when people see what time is it, and basically to conduct retrospective to enforce these principles. I don't have any other strategy, and sometimes it's very personal. I have seen some incredibly good engineers that feel responsible, they like to solve problems. They also have maybe this hero culture when they want to unlock things, it has to be one-on-one discussions. So there is a couple of rules on the team level, and after it will be one-on-one discussions. Thank you. Yes?
So you talked about scaling across. So the question about say, scaling into another region for the first time. Now, if you're hiring, what would be the sort of team structure you build out, and how many?
Okay. So the question is, in case we want to scale regionally, what is the hiring strategy, basically? How many people we want to hire, what kind of profile? Okay. I didn't mention about hiring because for me, it's not really a big problem, but I would like to reinforce what I mentioned a little bit earlier. When we start to go globally or regionally, we need to define the standard and the expectations. It will be incredibly complicated to make trade-offs to say, okay, we assume to have a lower standards in terms of technology, business mindset, communication in different regions. If we accept this compromise, I think this is a catastrophe, it's a disaster, because at some point the collaboration will not be easy. So whenever we have some teams that need to scale regionally, we want to start small, 3 to 4 members. We want to have a core team when they can operate autonomously. Then we are super selective on the criteria. They need to be technically very good English communications, and some curiosity, allowing them to adjust with the cultural differences. And this is something that is non-negotiable. We want to have the same standard across all countries. Otherwise, we create frustration between teams. And we will favor some teams to say, okay, this team is going to do all the interesting stuffs, and the second team will be all the boring stuffs. And this is not what we want. Okay? Thanks for the question. Yes? So the question is, how do we manage Scrum teams that are in 2 different regions? So if you don't have a huge overlap, you can do that. If there is no, you need to have some overlapping at some point because people need to synchronize, right? So this is basically what we did. Here, for example, we have a team in Germany, we have a team in Egypt, we have a team in Vietnam. Maximum time zone differences is 5 hours. This is still manageable. We try to work with the US, for example, from Vietnam. It's really hard because we have 11 hours of differences, depending on the costs. Impossible to manage, right? You have some people that wake up, some people, they go to bed, impossible. Okay, so again, you have to find the right balance in terms of time overlapping, allowing the team to synchronize and to practice basically Scrum of Scrum. At some point, even if the team are autonomous, they still need to align about the roadmap, about the approaches. So I think above 7 hours of difference, it starts to be very, very challenging. Ideally, I would say 6 hours, it's really the best overlapping, and this is what should be considered, in my opinion. I think there was another question. Okay, awesome. Cool. Thank you so much for being here today. I will be there anyway if you have other questions, so let's have a coffee later. Thank you so much.